This podcast may contain disturbing content for some listeners. It's intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS.
The Federal Bureau of Investigation requests the public's assistance in developing information about the travels and activities of now-deceased serial killer Israel Keyes, who spent time in several Texas cities, including Houston, Humble, and Shepherd. Anyone with information about Keyes is asked to call 1-800-CALL-FBI. Based upon the ongoing investigation, Keyes is believed to have committed at least 11 kidnappings and murders across the country between 2001 and March 2012. Keyes committed suicide on December 2nd, 2012 while in custody in Anchorage, Alaska, after confessing to being a serial killer. The FBI is attempting to identify the extent of Keyes' travels and activities across the country, including Texas. Despite Keyes' denial, investigators believe Keyes may be responsible for a homicide in Texas or a surrounding state and are seeking the public's assistance specifically as it pertains to the following locations during the time period of February 12th through March 13th, 2012. Houston, Texas. On February 12th, 2012, Keyes rented a blue 2011 Kia Soul from a Houston car rental agency and had the vehicle until February 18th, 2012. Rental records show 2,847 miles were logged in that time period. In addition to Keyes' time in Houston, investigators suspect he spent a large part of his time in the Dallas area where his family lived. Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas. During February 2012, Keyes admitted traveling through the cities of Ezell, Aledo, and Claiborne, Texas. Investigators suspect Keyes' rental vehicle became stuck in a muddy rural area, possibly near Claiborne, Texas, between February 12th and February 16th, 2012. Glen Rose, Texas area. Keyes is also suspected of visiting the Post Oak Cemetery in the Glen Rose, Texas area between February 12th and 16th, 2012. Shepherd, Texas. On March 8th, 2012, Keyes withdrew cash from an ATM at the People's State Bank in Shepherd, Texas. Humble, Texas. On March 10th, 2012, Keyes withdrew cash from an ATM at the Humble Community Bank in Humble, Texas. Lufkin, Texas. On March 13th, 2012, Keyes was arrested for access device fraud related to using an ATM card of Anchorage murder victim Samantha Koenig. At the time of his arrest, Keyes had 3 telephone numbers in his possession. Investigators determined the numbers were of prostitutes, all from the Houston area. In 2012, Israel Keyes was 34 years old and described as 6 foot 2 inches tall and 190 pounds. To view additional information, photographs, and an interactive timeline and videotaped interviews of Keyes, please see the related story on FBI.gov. The FBI is seeking information from any person having contact with Keyes or his vehicle during this time. If you have any information concerning his travels and activities, you are asked to contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI.
Welcome to our Texas episode, y'all. One of the first things I had to do with Texas was make a really big map. The FBI timeline had an incredible amount of information, as well as the sources The Devil in the Darkness and American Predator. But the FBI press release and their timeline don't match. In what you just heard, they said he rented the vehicle on February the 12th. But the receipt says he rented it on February the 2nd. So let's recap the timeline just to get a good idea of what was really going on.
According to the official FBI timeline, this is the sequence of events for the killer's first trip to Texas. On February 1st of 2012, the killer abducted, raped, and murdered Samantha Koenig. Then on February the 2nd, he flew from Anchorage, Alaska to Houston, Texas. Also on February the 2nd, he rented a car from Thrifty Rental Car that he kept until February 17th, that he turned in with a recorded number of miles of 2,847. This was a 2011 Kia Soul. The killer had a reservation from February 2nd to February 5th in Lafayette, Louisiana at America's Best Value Inn. On the night of February 5th, checking out on February the 6th, the killer stayed at a hotel in New Orleans, Louisiana, before leaving for a Carnival cruise from February 6, 2012 to February 11, 2012. There were two events on February the 16th. There was an arson in Annetta South, Texas, and there was a bank robbery at 3:30 p.m. in Ezell, Texas.
So the events during the latter part, when he gets back from the cruise on February the 11th through February 17th, well, that's where it gets a little bit murky. And it's worth noting that his partner who went on the cruise with him and his daughter were present at different times. His daughter was present with him, flew down with him, but his partner joined him for the night that he stayed in the separate hotel on the 5th into the 6th before the cruise. After the cruise, his partner goes home, but his daughter stays with him. However, she's mainly with family in a different part of Texas. From the book American Predator. This was the itinerary that had raised Payne's and Ganaway's, the FBI agents, antennae during the roadside traffic stop. Had Heidi, the killer's mother, found it odd, Ganaway asked, that he chose such a complicated way to travel, especially with his little girl in tow? Not really, Heidi said. His sister's wedding had come up suddenly, and he said those were the cheapest plane tickets he could find. But Ganaway wanted to know more about another trip Israel had taken to Texas back in February, beginning hours after Samantha disappeared. Heidi recalled that one vividly, too. He and his daughter, Heidi said, flew from Anchorage to Seattle and then on to Houston, where they rented a car and drove to New Orleans. That's where they met up with Kimberly and boarded their 5-day cruise to Mexico, another serpentine route from point A to point B. When the cruise was over, he rented another car and drove with his daughter to Dallas, where Heidi was living. Kimberly had gone off on a road trip with a friend. This visit, Heidi said, had been the weirdest. It was clear something was very wrong with him, because once at Heidi's, he snuck out of the house sometime early in the morning, like a teenager. It was February 13th, one day before he and his daughter were due on a flight back to Anchorage. He had left a note on his bed, gone to fix the window and find a place to hide my guns, he wrote. That wasn't unusual, Heidi said. The window referred to the rental car, and he had always kept guns, even as a boy. The whole family had guns. Agent Ganaway asked gently, what happened after he left? When did he come back? That was the thing, Heidi said. He didn't come back. She showed Ganaway exchanges from a family group text beginning that morning, 2 hours after they found the note, 8:05 a.m. We can take your guns to redacted if you want, no problem. No word all day. Later that night, he texted back. He was stuck in the mud, he said, in the middle of nowhere. 8:34 p.m. We want to get you if you have any idea where you are. No response. 8:52 p.m. We have 4-wheel drive. If you give us an idea where you are, we'll come to get you. The next day, February the 14th, he texted to say he was parked near a big shopping center in Cleburne, an hour away. The family drove to pick him up, but when they arrived, no sign of him. So they spent the night sleeping in the parking lot in their van, waiting for his next text. Ganaway did not ask the obvious. Why not just go home, take a shower, get some sleep? Or if they were that worried, why not call the police? But she didn't want to put Heidi on the defensive, so Ganaway let her continue. On the morning of the 15th, finally, a call. He said he was on the other side of the mall, and there they found him, disheveled and incoherent. His rental car, a little blue Kia Soul, was splattered with mud. He had a litany of excuses. He ran out of gas, he said. His credit cards had been frozen. He had no cash. He hadn't eaten or slept in 2 days. This was unlike the son that Heidi and his siblings knew. That person was calm, neat, and resourceful. He was able to build or fix nearly anything. He could spend hours in the deep woods and never get lost. He was like a superhero. The notion that he couldn't find his way around suburban Texas in broad daylight was ridiculous. But no one asked him where he had been or what he had been doing. Instead, on February the 16th, Heidi booked 2 more plane tickets to Anchorage, and again, he left the house for much of the day and the next, finally returning with $900 in cash to reimburse his mother for the flight. He and his daughter flew out on the 18th, and that was everything that she remembered about those 2 trips. In relaying all this to Ganaway, Heidi had to admit that something had been very wrong. wrong. There was the extreme emotionality, and Israel seemed to be drinking a lot. Heidi was worried enough to call upon her church elders, who came by to offer counsel. She had no idea what was discussed, but his willingness to talk to them was yet another sign that something was amiss. He must have been truly distraught to sit with those self-proclaimed elders, who were really much younger than him. For all the things she didn't know, Heidi had given Ganaway more than she realized. A pattern of unusual travel, a burgeoning sense of the Keyes family dynamic, what seemed to be his mental health unraveling immediately after Samantha's disappearance, and one crucial takeaway. As curious as this family was, his behavior disturbed even them, and no one felt they could say a thing. But to Jolene Golden, Jeff Bell, Steve Payne, those days that he went missing in Texas weren't such a mystery. He had to have done something. Here's some media accounts of some of those things. From the Weatherford Democrat on February 20th, 2012. A Netta South fire may be arson. The Parker County Fire Marshal's office suspects arson as the cause of a fire that destroyed a 3,500 square foot home and barn in the 200 block of Terrace Court East in Annetta South, Thursday, February the 16th. It's very unusual, very suspicious, said investigator Lanny Paget on Friday. There were two buildings separated by 40 yards, and both structures were involved when firefighters arrived, which was fairly early, but there was no grass or vegetation burned between them, and it wasn't the result of radiant heat from one to the other. There were two separate fires. The resident of the home was visiting her mother at the time of the fire. Paget said the fire marshal's office would continue to conduct interviews with neighbors and workers in the area to see if someone noticed anything peculiar. Floor and carpet samples would be sent to labs to check for accelerants. Several departments responded to the large fire, which started between 9:30 a.m. and 10 o'clock a.m. Aledo Assistant Fire Chief Morris Leondar said Aledo was the first to arrive. I was in the second truck there after our engine, and our tanker was right behind me. It was basically a fully involved house, and the barn was fully involved too. We tried to stop the fire in the house, but it was so far advanced. When arson is involved, fires are often started in multiple locations. An officer with the Parker County Sheriff's Department who arrived early to cordon off roads said flames were visible over the treetops. It was a very hot fire, Paget said. Lots of fuel, clothes, and paperwork inside. Paget said he expects the investigation to continue over the next couple of weeks. An additional item from the Weatherford Democrat from February 21st, 2012. Police searching for robbery suspect. The Azell Police Department and the FBI are still searching for a male suspect who was involved in a bank robbery Thursday. The National Bank of Texas, located on Commerce Street in Azell, was robbed Thursday afternoon at 1:50 p.m. Upon arrival, it was determined the suspect entered the bank and displayed a handgun, said Azell Police Corporal Zachary Hatton. He told everyone to get on the ground and verbally demanded money from the bank teller. The bank teller complied with the suspect's commands. He left the location with an unknown amount of currency. According to Hatton, the suspect is described as a white male in his late 20s or early 30s. He was last seen wearing a white hard hat, like a construction hat, a white mask similar to a surgical mask, a dark coat, blue jeans, and sunglasses. According to Hatton, the suspect exited and went behind the bank, but employees did not follow him because he was armed. Police are still searching for additional information that may lead them to the suspect. Hatton also advised the public to always report suspicious activity. If they have any suspicious vehicles or what appears to be suspicious vehicles outside of banks or appear out of place at all, the public should give their local law enforcement agency a call. It would have been beneficial in this case. And what is most interesting about these two pieces of media coverage is they're before anyone knew who this killer was. So we know what he was doing on the 16th.
The other thing that was so interesting about Texas to me was there weren't a lot of candidates. Like nationwide, there weren't that many missing people during the time. If we can find them, this is the last one. You know, that was important. This is the last kill, so to speak, before he gets caught. But the problem with Texas starts early because there's two trips. And one of the trip, you know, it just makes no sense, like at all. I started trying to figure out what he was doing. So the gist of it is, this is in between Samantha Konig's murder and her body disposal for the first trip to Texas. Second trip, a little more complicated. Both of them, you know, he has places to be, you know, rental cars. Like, there's like lots of records to look at. One of the hardest parts about this one is, well, I'll go ahead and say that, like, I alluded early on social media that Dinosaur Valley State Park was where one of the bodies was. But I realized something. Can't go into it this early, but the gist of it is this. That led me to the final location, which is a different type of map. And, you know, I can actually tell the FBI what types of maps they have now because of the verbiage. So with Dinosaur Valley State Park, there was something that should have been there. Glen Rose, the cemetery thing is not a cemetery thing. Well, so mid-interview, they whip out this picture and they say, look what we found on your phone, which he acknowledges it. And what he's done is he's taken this photo of a map quest, and the photo shows him how to get to a cemetery in Glen Rose, Texas.
What was the cemetery about? One in Glen Rose? Does that sound right?
Yeah, I went to a few different cemeteries.
What did you go to the cemetery for? That's the picture that was on your phone.
Is that on MapQuest or something?
Yeah, I think you took a picture of your computer, is what it looks like.
We got careless. Some problem with technology, you're dependent on it. You don't even think about it anymore. No, that was mostly, I was just looking for different places, convenient locations. I went to a lot of different places because none of them really seemed like they worked out. People are very nosy in Texas, so it took me a while to find anywhere that I felt comfortable.
Did you find that place?
Well, I found a few different. I didn't take anybody on that trip, if that's what you're asking. That's what the thought process was. I didn't do it, but
Why a cemetery? A disposal site cemetery or an abduction site?
not an abduction site, just somewhere to take somebody.
Okay.
So you'd stake the cemeteries out kind of like you talked about staking out some of these other places?
Yeah, I would go and. A lot of those cemeteries have maintenance sheds and stuff in them that are usually pretty easy to get into. So.
And pretty remote. This one's in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
So is that similar to the thought where you were saying you were thinking about doing some of this stuff in churches? Would that have to be the same opposite maybe of doing it in cemeteries, or why? Just for the remoteness of it, or specifically because it's a cemetery?
Well, it was had more to do with practicality than any kind of preference on my part.
So there was no significance to a cemetery like there was to a church, like you had talked about before?
Not really. I mean, I like cemeteries. I don't know. Beyond that, it's not really.
The churches obviously had to do with the whole religious piece, but the cemeteries, there was none of that for you. It was just convenience, remoteness, you like them,
Right.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like them? Why do you like cemeteries? You think?
I don't know. I just always have morbid fascination. Cemeteries, a lot easier to explain your presence there too if someone happens to show up.
So you'd find a stone of someone to pretend like you were there to visit?
Yeah. I mean, easier to explain than some things.
So you're always thinking of that. You're always thinking of what you would say if you were to ask about your presence.
Yeah. It doesn't always work, so obviously you have to have a backup plan, but at least, like I say, a cemetery, it's cemetery, campground, something like that. Public places, it's easier to explain than private property.
Did you get questioned a lot? It kind of sounds like you were pretty good at picking places that wouldn't happen often.
No, I got questioned casually a few times, and it really felt like I was
by people.
Right. Yeah.
So did you ever get in a position where you started a conversation with someone that you had thought about doing something, and then they, for whatever reason, you got a vibe from them that it wouldn't be a good idea, or are you able to make a decision as soon as you see it, see the person?
No. It always has to be, I don't know, as soon as someone talks to me and sees me, then that's kind of puts it on a different spectrum for me. You have to take somebody by surprise. I don't know why. It just feels like, it's like when I start talking to people, then I go into a different mode. Like I want to be their friend or something. But obviously if I have already decided to take somebody, then I'm not their friend.
But you don't give them that chance either. It's not like you have a casual conversation and then overtake them or something. Do you do that so that there isn't anything personal up front?
I don't know. I hadn't really thought about it. It's just.
I think we already talked about this, but you were never questioned by law enforcement about why you were ever at any of these places or anything.
Well, like I say, casually.
By law enforcement.
Yeah.
Like they would see you at a trailhead and just
right
small talk with you.
Right. Yeah.
Are you here to fish? Are you here to hike? Those kind of things.
Right.
Let me see your fishing license.
Right, and I usually had
everything.
Yeah, I always had all that stuff. I honestly, a lot of times, that's what I was doing. Like, yeah, for as far back as I can remember, that's where I get a lot of the ideas, either fishing or out hunting.
Thinking of them.
Yeah. Stalking through the woods and see somebody in the woods, they don't see you. You sit there and watch them for a while. And I can remember doing that from the time I was like 13 or 14 years old.
Thinking you could just the fact that you're able to watch them and they don't know you're watching them.
Right. And then, I don't know. That was always the most comfortable scenario for me because it's a win-win situation. I'm out hunting or fishing, and if the opportunity comes up, then you take it. If it doesn't, it's not like you're out anything.
And I spent a lot of time going, what the hell does he keep talking about cemeteries for? Which I guess is like a creepy thing serial killers would talk about. And that's sort of what they run with. But the thing that I noticed after the fact is it's not a map to the Glen Rose Cemetery. It's a map to a nearby location. Specifically, that one's a map to Dinosaur Valley State Park. So he can say all that nonsense about he didn't find the right location or he couldn't find whatever remote. But there's a part of Dinosaur Valley State Park that on a map looks like a really remote thing. It's even marked that way. It's the verbiage. It's the way they say it. And I realized that he didn't have a map to a cemetery. He had a map to a campsite. And that's what made me think that this is a map to a secondary location. You know, they say don't ever let a killer take you to the second location. Well, this is his secondary location. His campsites, abandoned places, things like that. So that's how my mind started to wrap around. And I was like, he didn't get stuck in the mud. He went a place where he went to a place where the thing he expected to be there wasn't there, and he didn't know Texas yet in that area. He thought he did, and he was sort of hearkening back to days of old, because I think he committed another murder in Texas years ago and used these series of places, and I think I know where that location would be based on it. But it didn't work out this time, and that's what left him so frantic. But that's not even the crazy part about Texas. The crazy part about Texas is the bolos were all wrong. The press releases were all wrong. So the bolos were all wrong and the press releases were all wrong. You can't just start with the latter part. You actually have to go back to when he arrives in Texas. And that's where we get into our own mud, so to speak.
I'm going to go ahead and tell you that I think this killer was responsible for a very particular death many years ago in Texas. And I'm going to play that first before I get into breaking down the possibilities of Texas.
Rachel Louise Cook was visiting her parents' home in the Northlake subdivision of Georgetown, Texas in early 2002. She was on winter vacation from her school at San Diego Mesa College in San Diego, California. She was last seen by her family at 8 o'clock a.m., January 10th of 2002. When her mother left for work, she was still asleep at this time on the couch. Cook departed from her family's residence for her daily 4-mile run during the morning hours that day, sometime after her mother left. She is believed to have started her run at approximately 9:30 a.m. She was last seen between 11 a.m. and 11:30 a.m. near Netch's Trail, which is just 100 to 200 yards from her family's residence. Cook never returned to their residence and has never been heard from again. She was missed at 3 p.m. that day when her father came home to take her shopping and could not find her. Witnesses told authorities that an unidentified male was driving a late model white or blue Chevy Camaro or Pontiac Trans Am with white or black stripes along the hood and the trunk in the area of Cook's disappearance. He was reportedly speaking to another female jogger at the time. The man is described as being in his late teens or early 20s, with slick black hair. He may have been Hispanic or had a dark complexion. Some witnesses reported seeing a man inside the vehicle, which traveled along Navajo Trail and turned southbound onto Netch's Trail. Sketches of the unidentified male were released in 2020. Some witnesses claim to have seen 2 men inside the car. Authorities are also searching for information concerning a white pickup truck that was seen in the Northlake subdivision on January the 10th. The vehicle may have had a wide, dark-colored stripe across its lower portion. Witnesses stated that the sports car in the truck stopped along the road to speak to the jogger shortly after Cook's disappearance. Investigators announced that one of the possible unidentified witnesses contacted authorities voluntarily 1 week after Cook vanished. The individual was cleared of any involvement in her case. In August 2006, Michael Keith Moore confessed to Cook's murder. He stated he attacked Cook while jogging, knocked her unconscious, drove her somewhere, and raped her. After murdering her, he wrapped her body in a tarp, weighted it with rocks, and threw it into Matagorda Bay. Moore has an extensive criminal history and has spent nearly all of his adult life in prison. His father stated he began to get into trouble with the law at the age of 13, and many of his known offenses involved sexual misconduct or violence. At the time of his confession in Cook's case, he was already in police custody after being convicted of murdering a pregnant woman. He agreed to plead guilty to Cook's murder in November of 2006 in exchange for a sentence of life in prison. But in court, Moore reneged and pleaded not guilty to Cook's murder. Moore told the media he had been toying with authorities when he confessed to killing Cook, and that he got special treatment in prison in exchange for his cooperation. He stated that he knew nothing of her disappearance and the police should have known that. Prosecutors announced that he will go to trial for Cook's murder. Her remains have not been found, but investigators believe Moore's confession may be accurate. Cook was an accomplished cross-country runner at the time of her disappearance. All of her personal belongings were left behind at her family's home, where her parents and younger sister then resided. At the time of her disappearance, Cook was a student at Mesa Junior College in California and was planning to transfer to a college in Los Angeles. She has no history of leaving her family home without warning. She always left a note saying where she would be going. Rachel Cook was 19 years old, 5'2", and 110 pounds. She was wearing a green sports bra, a gray shirt tied around her waist, gray shorts or sweatpants, and white Asics or Adidas sneakers. She was carrying a bright yellow Sony Walkman with headphones. She has blonde hair and hazel eyes. Cook had auburn streaks in her hair at the time of her disappearance. She has 2 heart-shaped cherries tattooed on her left shoulder and a black star tattooed on her left foot near her pinky toe. Her ears are pierced multiple times, and her navel is pierced. Foul play is suspected in her case due to the circumstances involved.
Rachel Cook has always been one of those cases I wanted to solve. Rachel Cook could have been my sister, like timing-wise, like everything, like in her life seemed a lot like my sister, and that has always bothered me. And he looks like one of the sketches. And if that's one of his cases because of the timing of it all, I feel like that's one where we could find the body because they looked for her. Like that's not one that like flew under the radar. And so Rachel Cook comes up when I think about Texas. But then I have to like refocus and I have to think about, okay, what are we dealing with in the here and now in this trip in 2012? Well, I had accepted that we had 3 candidates that we could really boil down that would have been fitting this time in Texas when he's stuck in the mud. I have Joanne Hook, I have Kathy Arredondo, and then I have Jimmy Tidwell. And Jimmy Tidwell's the accepted one because Jimmy Tidwell, what's interesting about him, they were initially reported missing as a couple, Carol Tidwell and Jimmy Tidwell, on February 28th. And then they find out that she's still around. And his investigation is pretty complete. So Jimmy Tidwell is probably a victim of this killer. But Kathy could also be. And I know that's not something that we've all agreed on, but Kathy could be. And I say that because Jimmy Tidwell doesn't fit the stuck in the mud completely. Well, at least the record on him doesn't. In my mind, he's coming back from the cruise, gets Kathy, and then ends up getting Jimmy. And we have to figure out like, where the kid is in there. But I could see the 2 of them going down. But what I didn't see, because we sort of ruled out Joanne Hook.
And here's the synopses of the people we're talking about.
Kathy Joan Arredondo was last seen in her home in Houston, Texas on February 11th, 2012. That day, she and her live-in boyfriend got into an argument. He disabled her car so she couldn't leave the house, then left. Arredondo and her teenage daughter then left the house on foot and went out to shop and get a meal. While she was out, Arredondo sent her boyfriend a text message saying she was leaving him. They returned home, and at some point, Arredondo and her daughter saw her boyfriend go to a friend's house across the street. They didn't try to talk to him. Arredondo went to sleep on the sofa in her daughter's bedroom. She was last seen at 10:30 p.m. When her daughter woke up at 7 a.m., her mother was gone. She asked Arredondo's boyfriend where she was, and he said he hadn't gotten home until 5 a.m., and he hadn't seen her. She left behind her purse, money, wallet, clothes, identification, ATM card, and makeup. Only her keys, cellular phone, cigarettes, her engagement ring, and a matching necklace were missing. Arredondo has never been heard from again. Arredondo lived in the cities of Albuquerque and Clovis in New Mexico for most of her life before she moved to Texas in November of 2011. Although there's no hard evidence of foul play in her case, her family stated it's uncharacteristic of her to leave without warning, and they don't believe she would have abandoned her 3 children. Kathy Arredondo was 5'3" tall, 145 pounds. She was last seen wearing a white shirt, a black jacket, pink pajama pants with images of the cartoon character Eeyore, white sneakers, and her engagement ring and matching necklace. She has brown hair and blue eyes. She may use the last name Lawson Arredondo. She has a surgical scar on the left side of her face extending from her forehead to her nose, a tattoo of a unicorn on her left shoulder, and a tattoo of 3 hearts with her 3 children's names on her right arm. Her ears are pierced, and her nose was previously pierced, but the hole had closed by the time she disappeared. She was 37 years old. Her case remains unsolved. James Lamar Tidwell was last seen alive in February of 2012. He lived in Mount Enterprise, Texas, in Rusk County. He's 5'3", 175 pounds. He was 58 years old. Foul play is possible in the disappearance of Mr. Tidwell. His white 1979 Ford F-100 pickup was located at FM 95 and Highway 315 in Mount Enterprise, Texas. He has brown hair and green eyes. His hair is all one length, combed straight back past his shoulder and thinning on top. He may have been wearing a tan work shirt and blue jeans. Joy Ann Hook was last seen in Austin, Texas on January 19th, 2012. She has never been heard from again, and few details are available in her case. Joy Ann was 52 years old, 5 feet 6 inches tall, and weighed 140 pounds. She has brown hair and blue eyes.
Jimmy Tidwell is widely accepted to be this killer's victim because in the bank robbery I described to you earlier, the killer is wearing a hard hat and underneath he has taped human hair that matches Jimmy Tidwell. He also has a chilling clip where he describes that human hair is free if you take it.
Houston is he gets off, rents a car, and he's driving over to basically get on a cruise. Now, we're at a disadvantage here because this audio remains sealed, like this confession. So there's a couple of sources for this that I sort of cross-reference as we go, and that is the FBI has released information about it, and it's referenced in different search warrants. Devil in the Darkness covers it, and then American Predator covers it. And the FBI timeline lines up with what they're saying to some degree. We have a rough order of events. He rents a car, and then after he's rented this car in Houston, he drives over so that they can get on what is essentially a multi-day cruise. And the flight into Texas happened February the 2nd. He leaves Anchorage, and, Samantha is dead. He goes and spends the night at a Lafayette Best Value Inn. So he spends the night there. He stays there the night of the 2nd, the night of the 3rd, the night of the 4th. Checks out on the 5th. So he's had this rental car, and you got miles from Houston over to Lafayette. All right, so he stayed in New Orleans on the night of the 6th. Okay, so it wasn't the same hotel. All right, and he's gone the 6th, the 7th, the 8th, the 9th, the 10th, and the 11th. So 6 days he's gone. He gets back on the 11th. All right, so when he gets back the 11th, he's still got the same rental car. So let's just address that for a second. What the hell did he keep the rental car for?
Well, and honestly, that's a point that I overlooked at first. And when I realized that he had done that, I think it's a big deal. Now, you said that we're at a disadvantage because none of those interviews have been released. I do know at one point he was talking about taking his child to like a kid's Mardi Gras, and that's part of the reason he was there. There's no question that he was strapped for cash, and the rental car ultimately sitting there for 5 days doesn't make sense. And I'm not really sure, if I missed that they picked up on that. I'm not really sure. It's just so confusing to me because I would imagine that was probably $400 or $500 worth of rental car with just a rental car sitting there. Now, I would have to look back, but at some point his girlfriend joins him in Lafayette or New Orleans. They end up going on the cruise together, but she didn't travel with him. And I have a hard time with him doing much when he has his child with him.
I understand that. I mean,
do you? I can't remember how old the child was, but it doesn't seem like. I mean, they weren't a teenager. I don't think. They were younger than that, and so I just can't imagine.
At that time, they would have been 11.
Okay, so 11 years old. Yeah, I can't see. That's not an age. Well, I don't know. He could have been different, but I personally wouldn't leave my 11-year-old anywhere, when I'm out of town and we're on vacation. I wouldn't leave them alone. He could have been different. I don't know exactly when his girlfriend came, and I think, that could have been, he could have left his child with his girlfriend. That's a plausible alternative, but I'm not really.
Well, okay, so Kimberly was in the house. So when the killer is killing Samantha, Kimberly's in the house. And in that same interview with the Anchorage police, and a lot of it's redacted, it's in the FBI files, it's mentioned in American Predator. She says that, so the two of them flew out the next day early. And when I say the two of them, the killer.
You mean the child, right?
The killer and the child. Yeah, the killer and the child. So they fly out of Anchorage. And then the night that they're in New Orleans, she meets up with them. So
the very first night?
He's only in New Orleans one night, the 6th.
How is that possible? He flies out on the 2nd.
He's in Lafayette.
Oh, yeah. Okay, sorry.
So no, you're fine. It's confusing. That's why we're talking about it like this. All right, so to give you an idea of what was going on there, he flies into Houston on the 2nd, like you said, and the place that he drives to is actually like closer to Houston. It's like, so if he drove over like basically 3 hours from Houston, right past Lake Charles into Lafayette. Lafayette is going to be another 134 miles from Lafayette to New Orleans. So he's basically in Lafayette until the 5th. And then he meets up with his partner and they go on this cruise. It could be that like he didn't want to take everything they took, I guess. But like a rental car is a shitty way to store a bunch of stuff. Like I don't think you're going to leave like really important stuff in a rental car. Do we think it's something illegal? Like do we think like the phone from the murder in Alaska is in there or something like that?
No, I mean, I really don't. And I don't really know a whole lot about cruises. I think that they search your luggage. Is that
Yeah, but he
true?
wasn't going to be, yeah, well.
No. But my point is, if they search your luggage going onto a cruise, then he probably wouldn't have wanted stuff in there. If it was something like a cell phone, I mean, they're not looking for that kind of stuff. They're looking for something, I assume, that would harm people on the cruise, like that kind of thing.
They at that time they reserved the right to like search the luggage and like confiscate any item deemed dangerous. But he flew. So that's the other thing. So he not only would be risking, like, so he flew from Anchorage to Houston. So what could he carry there that he would be scared to carry on a boat?
I don't feel like he was scared to carry it on the boat.
All right. So what coincides with this afterwards, when they get back and they get moving again? Well, he buys air freshener after. So he gets back on the 11th from this cruise, and he, that's one of the items that he purchases in sort of short order. The 11th until roughly the 15th, the timeline is reconstructed from other people's recollection.
So some of the conversations that Meg and I have take place days apart, and some of them take place months or even years apart. And Texas is just that complicated, including why is one of the people that I mentioned earlier, Rachel Cook, on the killer's stupid computer? But one of the things we were sure of is we wanted to know why the killer held onto that rental car. And over time, we think we figured it out. I don't think that the killer killed Joyanne Hook. I'm not even sure if she's even missing. But I do think he possibly killed Jimmy Tidwell and Kathy Arredondo. And when we went looking for a reason why he kept that rental car, we thought he might have killed someone else. So we went looking for cases that fit, and we found one.
Bayesian statistics, in its most oversimplified form, is a mathematical procedure that applies probabilities to statistical problems. It provides people the tools to update their beliefs in the evidence of new data.
It was a case that we had already ruled out until we realized that he had kept that rental car while he was away on a cruise. Suddenly, the case made sense.
Now, you mentioned Mark Oldbury.
Yeah.
And I'm going to have to say no to him. And actually, something you said earlier is why. Because you said that he went missing on February 2nd, 2012, out of Vidor, Texas. And if you'll recall, February 2nd was the day that Keys in, and you said he went like straight to Lafayette.
Yes.
For me, that crosses him off the list because I made the assumption that, okay, for one thing, he had his child. So if he didn't see his family and like have a place to kind of, leave her, I don't see that happening.
Well, so you had marked him off the list before. Okay, because without the information we have now, I had presented him to you at another point in time. So what you had told me before was that you felt like he was so he had a mental health issue.
Okay. Yeah,
And
I think I assessed that.
we drilled way down on it, and like we couldn't tell if it was a drug issue or a mental health issue. But the other thing we found was we couldn't tell if he was lying or not. And I say that because he had just gotten out of jail. It might have been a week earlier, but basically he had gotten out of jail and gone camping. But the deal with him was, and this is how you said it to me. You said the way his stuff was strewn isn't very like this killer. It's almost like someone has lost their mind and has taken off their clothes as they're running to get into the water and kill themselves.
Oh, I actually remember that case. I didn't realize that this was it.
Well, this is one of them. I hate to even be the one to have to point that out, but this is one that you said like pretty much exactly.
No, I stand by what I said. I mean, because he doesn't leave stuff. I mean, he doesn't. Because if he has a weird thing that I don't understand about taking, and it's not even like he's taking souvenirs because he ends up burning the stuff anyway. So I think he has a few like jewelry pieces, and eventually they find because he tells them about them. But I mean, he's really strange about taking stuff, not leaving things behind. So if that's the case, I don't see like where they found any of his stuff or anything like that. Maybe I'm not looking in the right place.
Well, just while I've got you here talking about this, I'm just going to send it to you in a way that you can sort of read the format. Because previously this was the link I gave you, and this is what you were acting off of. This is not all of the information, but this is the majority of the information.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I remember this now.
Mark Julian Oldbury Jr. was last seen in Vidor, Texas on February 2nd, 2012. His uncle dropped him off at Mansfield Ferry Road at 4:00 p.m. so that he could go on a solo fishing and camping trip. He has never been heard from again. Searchers found his clothes, shoes, backpack, wallet, and fishing pole scattered over a wide area, but there was no sign of Oldbury himself. Oldbury has a drug problem, and in mid-January 2012, he spent 3 days in jail on a charge of public intoxication. On January 27th, less than a week before his disappearance, the police took him to the hospital for a mental health evaluation. On January 31st, against his mother's wishes, the staff at the hospital deemed him well enough to go home, and he was released into his uncle's care. Oldbury's mother stated her son frequently claimed to be Jesus or King James, and that he was taking bath salts, a drug that can cause delusions, hallucinations, and suicidal thoughts. In February 2013, a year after his disappearance, Oldbury's family obtained a death certificate for him and held a memorial service. Investigators believe he drowned on his fishing trip. His body has never been found. Mark Oldbury was 31 years old, between 5'7" and 5 feet 10 inches tall. He weighed 145 pounds. He was last seen wearing a t-shirt and jeans. Oldbury is addicted to drugs. He may suffer from mental illness. He has blonde hair and blue eyes. Oldbury has a tattoo on his right upper arm at the shoulder. He has scars on his left index finger, lower abdomen, and the right side of his left leg.
I mean, this guy probably, unfortunately, committed suicide. I don't know that. I mean, and I don't even know if it's appropriate to say that, but I see, like, this guy had a hard time, like a really hard time. And while the aspect of him going on a solo camping and fishing trip fits well within a victim of Keys, the date doesn't work for me as far as him being able to fly in and get the rental car and drive to Lafayette.
Right, and we had worked it another way as well, because that was the date of last contact. We had said, you know, how long is he in the woods and when did they go looking for him? We had looked at it from several angles, and there are pieces of him that fit. You know, this is very similar to the timeline here is very similar to the Kathy case. And her case was one where it was another one where it's like, there's not enough time. Now, the reason I brought him back up with you, and since we're in Texas, particularly doing the first trip in Texas, the reason I brought Mark back up is, what if he's in the trunk?
In what trunk?
What if he's in the trunk of the rental car sitting while they're on the cruise?
Well, that's what I'm saying, though. I don't see how Keys could have grabbed him. He flew into Texas on the 2nd. If he's in Lafayette, like, immediately, he didn't have time to do anything in Texas.
And he has the kids. So that's what really, for me, that's why I was asking about the kids stuff so much, is because to me, this case rules out the kid thing until he gets the kid to mom's house after the cruise on the 11th or 12th.
Correct. And earlier when we were talking, you said when you were giving the account of the first Texas trip that he basically flew to Texas and then drove to Lafayette, and there was no in between.
Right. Time-wise, there wasn't much going on there. There couldn't have been.
Right. And so honestly, I almost wish that I could make it work. And if he had gone to his mom's house for the night or something, I could see this. I could see him being in the trunk, because, like, why did he keep that car?
Ultimately,
why didn't anybody else notice that he kept that car?
Well, it's bothered me for a while, and that's one of the reasons I dug so deep in Texas. When I saw, let me clarify that I have hotel reservations indicating the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th, into the 5th at Lafayette, and then a night in New Orleans on the 6th. By all accounts, it looks like he flew on the 2nd, therefore drove Houston to Lafayette. So if this guy's getting dropped in Vidor, if this guy's getting dropped there on the evening of the 2nd, then
at 4 p.m. Yeah,
that's sort of how we've ruled out, like, these cases. And, like, his bothers me. He's just sort of gone. And the assumption was, like you said, that more than likely he drowned on his fishing trip.
Right, because he wasn't in a good mental place.
But other than that, like, he does seem sort of like what we were looking for along the way. He fits a couple of categories that we'll discuss later, but ultimately he's not that far out in the middle of nowhere. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't know how far is the door from where Keys flew in. Like,
well, flying into Houston, if you drive to Lafayette, you cross through Vidor. Houston is like west of Vidor, so you would be driving kind of across the bay. So going Houston, Texas to Lafayette, you run into a number of issues there because timing-wise, you need at least 4 hours, and you've got a kid in the car, right? That's my
understanding. I mean, I can't figure out how he wouldn't have a kid in the car.
So you would drive right through Orange, Texas. This area around Vidor and Orange is like right in the middle of that. But the only way I made it work, and I did one time, like I have one scenario that sort of branches into these other little scenarios where I could see him. This is why I'm asking you so many questions about this stupid rental car. And I know it sounds like I'm just repeating myself, but I'm really not. I could picture him like pausing at Vidor, Texas, having the kid asleep at a rest stop, stepping down into the woods in Orange County. For some reason, sees this guy, and the guy's talking to himself, and he's like, what? This is like a gift. And he pops him on the head, and he's like, oh, shit, what do I do with him? So he doesn't take the stuff. He's like, oh, God, my kid's asleep in the car. And he's like, what do I do now? And he puts him in the trunk of the car. He does something to make sure, he binds them up really good, and that's why he ends up keeping the rental car. So then what did you do with him?
On.
That's where it gets crazy.
Okay, so hold on a second, though, because I just realized something that could be important. When is he met by his girlfriend in Lafayette? When does she arrive? Do you have any idea?
I don't think she meets him in Lafayette. I think she's when they change motels on the 6th. When they go to New Orleans, I think that's where she meets up with them.
Okay, now follow me here. Lafayette is only 124 miles away from the door. And I would not put it past him to leave his child in a hotel where he felt like she was safe.
I mean, you put the right thing on the TV and have the right amount of food around, and daddy's going to go do a thing. I mean, I've done it with even a teenager.
Right, and I think the child was like 11 or 10. I can't remember. But so what I'm saying is, okay, you just kind of put it back on the table for me because, like, I had to pull up the map myself because I don't understand when I'm being told directions. I have to see them. The door is closer to Lafayette than Houston is almost. I mean, it's not that far in terms of keys and the number of miles he drove on that rental car. Oh, wow. Okay, so he would have gone to Lafayette, left, and returned to the door. And I think the rest of what you said as far as, like, putting him in the rental car, it makes sense. That I buy for keeping the rental car for the time he was on the cruise.
Okay, but the body's not in there anymore, but the dead body smell is, and he can't clean it because he's got to meet up with the girlfriend, right? So if he's got to meet up with the girlfriend and he's got to keep the fucking rental car, so he keeps the rental car, gets back, still smells like poor Mark, got to get some air freshener.
Now, I don't know. Wait a second, though. Well, I'm saying the body was in the car, like, while he was on his cruise.
Well, it could be. I'm
Okay,
saying what I am saying to you is there is another possibility in addition to that. I'm saying, first of all, I do not put it past him at this point to have a body in the trunk of the rental car.
Right. Well, the air freshener's not bought until like a couple weeks later.
Right, but the air freshener is bought when they get back from the cruise, but before they turn the rental car in. So you got the air freshener to coat the inside of the trunk after you clean it. Because even if you clean the trunk of a rental car that had a body in it, guess what? Still smells like body. But you've got to do like a serious professional clean on to get that smell.
Okay, hold on. Let's see how warm it was in New Orleans.
This is going to be February 2012, New Orleans.
He's at a hotel, so he would in theory have access to a ice machine.
Oh, wow. I wonder if, that's interesting. 66 degrees Fahrenheit on February 1st. I'm just scrolling through. See the
I found like some, but I'm...
All right, so February the 6th. It's in the 50s. February the 7th, it gets to 64, 66. It's in the 60s.
And then it drops.
And it drops down to the 40s. This is totally plausible that he did this.
That is the only way that I can explain the rental car. I'm telling you, it has bugged the crap out of me. Because that is not something that would have been characteristic. Who would do that? You would just turn the car in.
What?
I mean, that's why they're rental cars. You turn it in, and then you get a new one when you return.
So we get off the cruise ship. Body's in the trunk. Probably leaked everywhere with the ice that he put in there.
Why didn't anybody notice?
I don't know what he did there. I don't know where the car...
That's a pretty bold move right there.
Well, he was getting sloppy. I mean, he left Samantha Koenig in his cabinet, in his shed, in his driveway. So let's just go ahead and got the body in the trunk. He's driving around fixing his window, whatever that means. Hey, maybe that's why the window was fucked up. Maybe somebody tried to look in the car and they couldn't get in it because they wanted to know what the smell was.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible.
I mean, that would just...
I felt like that was like a very bold thing to do.
So if for some reason he somehow happens upon this guy while his kid is napping at a rest stop or whatever, and he puts him in the trunk of his car, and he goes to New Orleans, and he goes on his cruise, and the body's in the trunk, right? So if it's Mark Olberry in there, I'm totally, I have apologies to all the people that may know Mark, if they ever come across this. I want to know what happens next. And I want to know, does that negate Jimmy Tidwell?
I mean, it very well could. I don't know about Jimmy Tidwell. Okay, so thinking about those things separately, if this is like a impulse thing, I am actually going to look at this a little harder because, he's so amped up. Because you were talking like not even, it's not even 24 hours past the time that he had killed Samantha Koenig. And, like, he's passing through somewhere, and you know how he spoke about being, like, passing through somewhere. He could totally, I mean, that's his bread and butter as far as getting away with things. Okay, he takes the guy, you know, knocks him out, possibly strangles him. There's nowhere for him to dispose of the body because this is complete impulse. He wasn't planning it at all, I guess.
But it fits the decompensation too.
Well, so he ends up in the trunk, and so they go, you know, he's in Lafayette, and he's doing stuff with his child, and there's really not an opportunity time-wise or place-wise or, like, he can't leave the trail-wise to dispose of the body. Now, he left Samantha Koenig locked in a shed in his driveway, like you just said. And this is, like, literally the day before Mark Oldbury went missing. Israel Keyes flew to Houston and drove to Lafayette. So there's not a lot of time that has passed here. And it seems about as reasonable that he would have thought it equally okay to put a body in the trunk of a rental car as he did to leave a body in a shed in his driveway.
Well, he was already breaking his own rules. So, he talks about being amped up with, like, arsons and bank robberies and stuff and murders, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he's amped up because he just raped and strangled an 18-year-old barista, which is horrible.
Right,
so
and left her dead in a shed.
He abducts her from real close to his house, which is broken one rule, and he left her in the shed, which is definitely another rule. So this fits that. The impulse part fits that. And I'm aware this is terrible, by the way. I am aware. I don't want to be the one to have to suggest this to anybody ever, but, like, this is part of the story, and it's part of what I ran down, part of what you pointed out.
No, I know. I can't think of, under all the circumstances, you know, I don't think it's a stretch to say that the reason Israel Keyes kept his rental car while he was on a 6-day cruise or whatever is because there was a dead body in it. I don't think that's a stretch. The other thing is perhaps he didn't leave the body in the car, but the body was in the car at some point, and he did dispose of it before he left on the cruise, but he was concerned that it might be found and, you know, there's evidence in the car. And he would have more time to, you know, to clean it or what have you after he returned. And so, again, he keeps the rental car. They both sort of point to the same thing. I mean.
So he gets back. He's got to deal with the rental car, and he's got to deal with his family, right? Then we get back to Jimmy Tidwell or not Jimmy Tidwell. And ultimately, I think, like, that's a toss-up for me. I don't think when he left and goes back to Alaska, if Jimmy Tidwell is also a victim, he is dead. So Samantha Koenig, in my mind, was the last victim. Like, that was the last one. Until I heard somebody mention Jimmy Tidwell, and then I started looking at it, and then you and I started talking about this whole case, and we've gone back and forth. It's weird, but there could be as many as 3 more victims.
Yeah, I know.
That's horrifying. And the more horrifying fact of it, well, I don't even know if you can get more horrifying, but I'm going to say something more horrifying, is the possibility that the time sensitivity plays into this as well. And, you know, at this point, Texas has become 2 episodes. Not for any other reason than the fact that, like, once you narrow down the missing persons, you have to end the first trip. And the first trip's ending is with the potential that by the time he got stuck in the mud and flew back, we're not talking about 1 body anymore. We're talking about possibly 2.
Jimmy Tidwell is not ruled out by the possibility that by Mark Oldbury being a victim when Keyes was on his way from Texas to Lafayette. I think he flew those particular ways because he was looking to do something.
So this episode was originally about finding 1 additional victim. I'm going to go ahead and spoil this for you. By the time we're all said and done, in 2012 alone, we end up looking for 5 bodies in Texas. And on next week's episode, we're going to wrap this one up and talk about the killer's second trip to Texas. I'm going to close out this episode now, but at the end, I'm going to leave you with our most horrifying discovery. So make sure to listen to the show notes. Thanks for joining us. You can reach us at 252-365-5593 or at truecrimexcess.com or truecrimexcess@gmail.com if you want to send us a note. This episode was brought to you by LabrottieCreations.com. That's LABROTTIECREATIONS.com. Check out the merchandise and specifically their fun Pop Pet art custom pieces made from photos of your very own pets. Use the promo code CRIMEXS, that's CRIMEXS, for 20% off a fun, brightly colored, happy piece of art of your own pet at their site, LabrottieCreations.com. And a special thanks to our first Patreon, Kimberly Schlinky. Thanks so much for your support. Music in this episode was licensed for True Crime XS. The theme song was Indestructible by Noah Smith. We also used Finally Found You by Solitude. Thanks for listening. Please like and subscribe if you want to hear more. You can come over to patreon.com and check out what we've got going on there if you'd like to donate to fund future True Crime XS road trip investigations and FOIA requests. We'd also like to thank Anchor and Spotify for having the coolest all-in-one podcast platforms available. Definitely download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to start your own show today.
This is True Crime XS.
From a message from Meg. What do you want to do about the last victim? From me. What last victim? Meg. Hold on. Let me send you something.
Living in a world where you're constantly involved in researching the victims' lives, missing people who you suspect are the victims of serial killers, is a little much for everybody. At times, seems to be even worse. Early on in the process of researching Israel Keyes, I started hearing Israel Keyes in my head, even when I wasn't listening to him. I had dreams about his interviews, about the stuff he was talking about. There's certain things I gleaned from what he was saying I'll never be able to get out of my head. One of the very first things that caught my attention was a comment that he made in one of his very first interviews.
That's up to... I'm not really, pressure. I'm not trying to pressure anybody, but, it is kind of an unusual situation because some of the things might be time sensitive. So, if it takes a couple weeks for me to get into court or whatever to get the stuff moving, so be it, but,
And that's kind of the impression that we had talking to you, is that there might be some time sensitivity to this, and so that was part of why we wanted to...
There is, but, there's nothing I can do about it. I'm not going to say anything about any of that stuff until I know what's going on with this case.
Sure.
So, and this case, slowed down, so...
Okay, and that's fine. That's something that I guess maybe we weren't clear on.
Yeah.
That clip was from Israel Keyes' April 5th, 2012 interview with investigators. Now, keep in mind, he was arrested in Lufkin, Texas on March 13th, 2012. This was only 23 days later. But what did he mean by time sensitive? Was there someone who could have been saved?
When Meg sends me clips like this, sometimes they're just for my ears, but this one I got her permission to share with you because what the hell? Did they miss a living victim?